Welcome to another episode of Revolution Recap, coming to you today after a rare New England Revolution loss, 2-0 to New York City FC at Yankee Stadium that ended the Revolution's 9-game unbeaten run. Certainly a shorthanded Revolution side for this, which we'll get into. I'm Sean Donahue. Joining me today is Kris Valukis. Kris, how are you doing after that loss?
You know what? Somewhat depressed. It was a tough one to watch. Going forward for the season, this hasn't really affected my outlook on the Revolution, but just how I'm feeling after watching that game, just depressing. It was a tough watch. I let my 5-year-old son stay up late tonight to watch the game. You know, he's going to school. He's starting kindergarten this coming week, so I was like, what better time to just stay up late and watch a game? We're gonna have a good time together, and I couldn't have picked a worse night possible to have him do that. I don't know. It was just such a depressing, downward spiral throughout that game. Thankfully, he fell asleep in the second half and didn't have to witness full defeat. So, but yeah, that's how I'm doing. Sean, how are you?
Yeah, I mean, he didn't miss much by falling asleep in the second half. You go back. I remember looking at this lineup when it came out, and I tweeted out that this was only the second game all season the Revolution have started a match with less than 2 designated players on the field. The other one being that DC United game where the Revolution looked, pretty terrible in the first half and were trailing 1-0 at halftime, and then brought on some great subs at the break and turned things around to win that game. I got the feeling going into this game that wasn't going to happen if the Revolution fell behind, because I think New York City FC is a much better team than DC United, and playing on the road at Yankee Stadium is a kind of a different beast. And we got a lot to cover, but I do want to kind of set the stage of what the Revolution were dealing with in this game, and that Carles Heel, Tajon Buchanan were both suspended for missing the All-Star game. Maybe a stupid rule, maybe not a stupid rule. We'll get into that later, I think, a little bit, and give our thoughts on that. Matt Polster was back on the Revolution game day roster, but started this one on the bench. So that was good to see. Still no Brandon Bai. We don't know his status. Bruce's comments made it sound like he'd be back soon, so maybe we'll see him next week. But who knows with that? And then who else am I missing here at the Revolution? Oh, Gustavo Bo started this game on the bench as well after coming back from the All-Star game. We asked Bruce after the game why that was, and he said, he came back on Thursday. He cares about the player's health. He didn't think it was right to start him in this one, which makes perfect sense to me. And then less important, but a little bit surprising to me, is John Bell didn't make the bench for this one. John Bell played about 60 minutes for Revs 2 last weekend, so I would have thought that they would have had him available for depth in this one, because we've talked before about center back being kind of a weak area for the Reds. It didn't matter. Farrell and Kessler played the whole game, so I don't think it mattered. But that just surprised me a little bit and makes me wonder if he's not as fit or picked up a knock midweek. You'll never know with the Revs because they're not going to tell you. But that's just kind of more of me wondering aloud thing. But with kind of that setting the stage and understanding that this was not the best Revolution lineup, and despite that, they've won a lot of games without the best Revolution lineup. They lost this one. Kris, what was your takeaway from this game? A game, again, in which they're playing in a difficult situation at a crappy baseball stadium pitch that's smaller than normal, and we're missing a lot of big guys.
Yeah. First of all, New York City Stadium situation. It's hard to really give them crap for it. It's kind of like throwing rocks in a glass house. That old saying. Yeah, I understand the Revolution are not in a great situation with their stadium, but at least the pitch is a standard size. It's a full length field in a full width field as well. New York City's, I don't know. Every time I watch a game there, I just drives me crazy. It's so compact. I don't know how you can get anything going. There's no flow to the game. Everything just all of a sudden erupts. I don't know. I'm not going to go on and on about the stadium.
Well, we'll get into that one more later. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Because I don't know. I can't stand playing there. At the same time, it's always entertaining to watch from a more neutral perspective. So I enjoy watching games that do not involve the Revolution for the most part. But yeah, my takeaway from this game, there was a lot of different areas I guess I could look, and I always try to find more of a positive spin to it. That's just how I prefer to look at things. But you know what? I'm depressed. I've already gone over this. This match has really depressed me. I'm going to be somewhat negative here. I'm looking at DeJuan Jones and wondering what happened to this player that's been so dominant so far throughout the 2021 campaign. Of course, he's playing now on the right-hand side. This is, I think, second match in a row he's playing on the right-hand side with Brandon Bye missing. And DeJuan Jones is not even a shell of himself. That we want to talk about that second goal that New York City scored. He just completely gave up on that cross. As soon as the cross came in, he just stopped and started watching, saying, where is this ball going to go? Instead of following Castellanos and marking his man, Castellanos wide open. There's not a chance at all that Turner stays it. All he can hope for is that Castellanos makes another terrible mistake and skies it, which he almost did. It was a couple feet under the crossbar, but Castellanos did his best effort to not put that on frame. But you can't miss from 2 yards out like that. That's, I'd say, maybe 80% on DeJuan Jones, the other 20% on the fact that Andrew Farrell could not fully clear that whole possession, that spell of possession, that series that occurred right before the goal. But DeJuan Jones, I'm looking over at his side. I thought it was a very poor night. He had very poor passing statistics. I forget exactly what the number was, somewhere around 60%.
53.6%. It was 48% at halftime. He got it up to an astounding 53.6% by the time he was subbed out.
Even worse. So, yeah. And I don't want to turn this into a harping on DeJuan Jones podcast, because I think DeJuan Jones has been stellar this season. I think he deserves all the praise that he's been getting. I think tonight was a real big example of maybe how far on the opposite side of the spectrum DeJuan Jones can go. And maybe it's just because he's being pushed back over to the right side. I know he played on the right, I think, in college. And with the Revolution, he's been more of a left-based player or left-sided player. And he's been very comfortable there. And now getting changed up, having to cover for Brandon Bye, it's really changed his game. And it showed, especially when AJ De La Garza gets subbed on for you in the second half. I forget what minute it was that he got subbed on, but if you're a fullback and you're getting subbed out for a more defensive-minded fullback while you're losing 2-0, it's not a good look for your game.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And DeJuan Jones, we've talked a lot about the podcast, how good he's been this year as a left back. I think it's been 2 straight games where he hasn't looked very good as a right back. And I don't see any reason why he couldn't be a good right back if he got more experience there, but I think it's clear to me that he needs more experience there, and it is a big switch going from one side to the other. And yes, he's a naturally right-footed player, but you're playing very differently going from left back to right back. And it almost, I'm going way back, it almost reminds me a little bit of Kevin Alston, who I thought when he switched over to left back looked like he a naturally right-footed player, looked a lot more comfortable at left back when he got a chance to play there. And I see a little bit of the same from DeJuan Jones. I think you're forced to play a little bit differently when you're at left back and you're a right-footed player, and maybe make some more simple passes, and your confidence might not be exactly the same because you're so used to, when you're on the right, being able to put in right-footed crosses and get bombed down the wing and kind of thinking that way. But DeJuan has played so much at left back and gotten so good there that it's unfair to be too critical of his play at right back, but it's clear that he's, he needs more experience at right back to get better there, because I think both of these games have been, subpar. His passing numbers, I think, a week ago it was a different game. The Revolution were on the front foot in that game. I think he passed something like 81%. So it wasn't so much of his passing numbers that game as some other areas of his game, but
82. Yep.
Yeah, so this game, it was the passing numbers, it was the defense. I think, like you said, he was a big part of being at fault in that second goal. I think Tristison had gotten hurt shortly before that second goal too, and kind of had taken himself out of that play and hadn't gotten up. So the Revolution were sort of playing down a man too, which didn't really help things, like compounding everything else. But none of that changes the fact that DeJuan Jones let Castellanos sneak in behind him. There was no question that he was the only guy that could have covered him, and he was in a position where he could have covered him, but he hesitated, got caught flat-footed, and Castellanos has snuck in behind him. So it's hard for me to place much fault on that, on anybody else. Again, like you said, Farrell could have done better there. They could have done a better job closing out Morales in the cross. But at the end of the day, Jones has to do better on that play. So yeah, I agree with you there. And, hopefully Brandon Bye comes back soon, because the two of them were playing really well with Bye on the right and Jones on the left. And I don't think Mafla had a bad game, but I still think that Jones has been a really good left back for the Revs this season. And I, for one, I'm looking forward to them having their first choice defense back, right?
100%. It's been pretty shocking, I think, to see how disjointed the defense has become once you start rotating players in and out. And it goes to show, we've been talking about it all year. We talked about it in the offseason. There's a lot of lack of depth as far as the whole back line goes. AJ De La Garza came in and he was the depth signing. And to me, that's he should be more of a, break in case of emergency type player. Given his current age and experience, he's still a valuable player to have on the roster, but he should not be next man up, so to say. Maybe Bell was supposed to be that player to fill that role. I know he was signed as well, of course, in the offseason. I kind of wish that this team went out to get some sort of center back help, and we were talking about it for the summer transfer window. Are the Revs going to rue the opportunity or the decision to not make any signings and not bring in any center backs, especially? And I think that answer is starting to be yes. I think there's a lot of gaps on this back line, and it's really biting them. And tonight was one of those games that they paid the price for not having the correct depth.
Well, I think it's always unfortunate when, one injury makes you have to change two spots. And that's what's happened with Brandon Bye. One injury has meant, DeJuan Jones needs to switch over to right back. And again, we've talked about it's a naturally right-footed player. You'd think it would be natural, but it's not. He's been playing left back for a very long time. That's what he's comfortable at. That is now his natural position, for lack of a better term for that. So they put Mofflett at left back. So you've switched both your fullbacks to guys that aren't your starting fullbacks. DeJuan Jones is starting left back, but it's not the same having him play right back. And part of that was because I think AJ De La Garza, the first game Bye was out, got a start and didn't look that great at right back. Didn't have a great game. And this game, De La Garza had to come in because Jones wasn't having a good game. So it's kind of a compounding problem that again, I stand by my comment on last week's podcast. I'm not going back on my comment that the Revs had the deepest team they've ever had. I do think that is definitely the case. But like we said before, there were some areas of the defense where they could have improved depth, and they didn't do that. So I think that is coming to hurt them right now. But with that said, I don't think Brandon Bye's injury is particularly serious. I do think there's a good chance he'll be back next week, and if not that, the week after. So I think it's a short-term problem, and knock on wood, these guys stay healthy for the stretch run. But I agree. It was a rough performance for Jones, coming off of another subpar performance from Jones that was masked by the fact the Revolution had a dominant win. But with that, my takeaway is on the other side of the ball, and that's it actually goes to a question we got on Discord from Macho TM, who asked, why can't this team create anything without Carles and Tajon? I mean, it goes beyond that. I think it's without Carles, Tajon, and Bo that the Revolution really struggle. And, it's, again, talking about depth, the fact that they've done so well without Carles Heel is really impressive. They've managed to create chances. They've managed to score enough goals to win a lot of games. But then when you take Tajon away, who's one of those guys that creates a lot of chances, then we take Bo away, who as we discussed is top 5 in the league this year in chances created, along with Carles Hill is number 1. That any team I think would struggle in that scenario. And then you're going up against a New York City FC team that's really good. They're a good team, and they're especially a good team at home. And it's a difficult situation in New York. So I don't think it's surprising that they struggled without those guys, but it is a sign that there is a limit to the Revolution's depth. There's only so many guys they can replace. And when I saw the Revolution's lineup, going out in this game, I texted Chris before and said, this looks like a game that the Revs could lose to me because of that midfield, because of the lack of creativity. I think Chris was a little bit more positive than I was going into this one. But when I saw that midfield, I said Boateng and Tristison have a lot of pressure on them to create chances, and Boateng's done it recently. Tristison has been a disappointment in that category. I think he's had his moments. But this was a game where he really needed to step up. And he was playing out in the right, so playing more as an inverted winger. I don't think he stepped up enough in this game. I don't think he created much at all. Boateng created a few chances. I thought he looked decent, not as good as he had in some of the past games, but decent. But there was also a lot more pressure on him when Tajon Buchanan's out on the field there's a lot more focus on Tajon Buchanan than there's on Boateng. So it opens up the field more for him. And with Gustavo Bo's on the field, same thing. There's more dangerous players that teams have to focus on. I think you looked at the lineup in this game and you saw Boateng as the guy that was going to be potentially the primary creator for the Revolution. And as good as he's been, that's asking a lot from him. And I thought he did okay. But that to me is not surprising that, given that the Revolution didn't create a lot of chances. I don't think, Martial's been decent. I don't think he was involved in the attack enough. We've seen moments in the past where he's, looked good in the attack. I don't think this game was one of them. McNamara, I don't think he was as involved in the attack as we've seen him sometimes. So yeah, there was absolutely a lack of creativity in the midfield, and the Revolution bypassed the midfield a lot in this game. I think, I forget when it was, sometime after the 30th minute, when I think, Martial was at something like 6 touches and McNamara was at 9 touches. Christensen was at 9 touches. So they really were bypassing the midfield. And again, part of this is, a compact New York City field where there's not a lot of room for creativity, but you're also missing the guys like Carles Gil who are good at tight spaces, and Tajon Buchanan is capable of creating spaces. At the end of the day, I'm not surprised, but this game just showed that the Revolution don't have enough creativity without their 3 best creators, and Carles Gil, Gustavo Bo, and Tajon Buchanan. And to me, that's not surprising that was the case.
When you're going down the depth chart of creativity, and if you're at number 4 and we're complaining about not having enough creativity,
right?
I think that's a fair point to make, and I think that maybe that's something that we should exploit as a positive. The fact that we do have 3 players that we can talk about that are probably top creators in the league. Obviously, statistically, 2 of them are. I don't know where Buchanan falls on that list, but being able to have 3 players that create as much as they do is such a gift, if you want to call it that, for the Revolution, that once they're not there, we start realizing, how difficult maybe a lot of other teams are having it. How difficult the Revolution would have it if we didn't have those players on the pitch. It was tough watching with the creativity. I think Teal Bunbury was kind of given a lot of the responsibility to create as well. Up top with Adam Buksa, you had Tristan, I think, going down the wings. I'm not really sure what he was doing most of the game. He was pretty absent. Boateng was very active, but again, going down the wing, not creating anything through the middle. Anytime that the play went through the middle, it didn't go through Martial, it didn't go through Boateng, it didn't go through Tristan. It went through Teal Bunbury or Adam Buksa. I thought Adam Buksa had a fantastic game when you're talking about hold-up play. I thought Teal Bunbury did pretty good when you're talking about how he's doing for create chances, but not quite good enough. The final pass was not always there. Maybe if you want to talk about back in the 3rd or 4th minute, when Teal had a very nice header to play in Adam Buksa, and Buksa skied it, which would have changed the complete complexion of the game going forward. But Teal did okay overall, but not having that final pass, that final play, really hurt the Revolution in the long run as far as creativity goes and creating chances.
And you do have to say, with all of that said, the big caveat to all of this is playing at Yankee Stadium makes playing through the midfield difficult in general.
Yeah.
So, the Revs were in a difficult spot with who they were missing, and that was made more complicated by the fact they were playing at that postage stamp field in New York City FC. So, not surprising at all that they struggled to create given who was out, but also there's a big asterisk and who knows what this would have looked like on a real field, right? I mean, I still don't think the Revolution would beat New York City FC if this game was played at Red Bull Arena, or something, right. And the Revs were missing those guys. I don't think they would have. But it's hard to say for certain. I do think the game would have played out differently, right?
100%. And I think that we absolutely need to make sure we give credit to New York City, because this is a very good team, and they fielded almost their number 1 team. They still have Hebert, who's coming back from injury right now. He was just medically cleared to return. He's working on getting his fitness back. And once he's on the field, that New York City team is going to be extremely dangerous. We've obviously all seen, or not all, I guess, but a lot of us have seen these power rankings based on some sort of alternative statistics. I'm not really sure what it was based on, but
some sort of algorithm. But if you want to call it some sort of alternative reality, that would work too.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. It was, I don't know, this specifically chosen statistics to create this algorithm to put New York City up at the top, like 5 spaces ahead of New England Revolution, which blew my mind that the Revs were so far down. You want to say New York City is a good team, that's fine. They are a very good team. And I think tonight we got to see how good of a team New York City is. And Castellanos, of course, he's missed. We talked about this last week. How many chances has Castellanos missed? He's been right there. He's got now 10 goals on the season. He could have a lot more than that. I think
he could have 30.
Yeah, and we're not even like exaggerating that. It's been unreal how many chances he's missed and how many like really big chances he's missed as well. So first of all, I also want to mention, or it's not first of all at all, but I want to make sure we mention, why did the Revolution not make a game plan to go after Castellanos? Just throwing that out there. I would have loved to see Castellanos shut down a bit more. I get it. He's a really tough player to shut down. There's a lot of other good players on the team, but man, they really let him in, and he just ate up the whole defense. I don't even remember what I was starting on this rant. I have so much to rant about from tonight. But we were talking about the pitch, and if this was on a bigger pitch, of course, I agree. New York City would have still, I don't want to say steamrolled the Revolution. I think they did kind of steamroll them at Yankee Stadium, but it would have been maybe a better game for the Revolution because they could play more into their pocket. But yeah, New York City has a fantastic team, and especially deploying a full lineup like that, Revolution had a real uphill battle tonight.
Well, yeah, and I don't think the small field is the reason that DeJuan Jones wasn't marking Castellanos on that goal, and I don't think the small field is the reason that Henry Kessler didn't step up in time to make the offside trap work in the first goal. I mean, there's a lot you can say about the small field, but those were mental errors that happened from the Revolution that I don't think change if you're playing on a normal sized pitch. With that said, you talked a lot about Castellanos. I got to talk about him too, because I spent a long time in the last podcast talking about how many chances he misses and why that's I think a lot of rankings that we're talking about that we think are dumb are taking into account the fact that New York is creating a lot of chances and not scoring on them and giving them too much credit for that. Maybe the Revolution were watching the same highlights I've been watching of Castellanos, where he gets breakaways and blows them, but in this game he scored 2 goals and exceeded his expected goals total, which is not something you see from him very often, but he's been getting better recently. So I think that is a good trend for New York City FC, because if he's finishing his chances, they're going to win a lot more games. So yeah, I mean, they're going to be a team to watch going forward. And I think the Revolution are in a very good position seeding wise in the East. But this is definitely one of those games that makes you say, if the Revolution somehow were to fall behind New York City FC, I don't even know if that's, numerically possible at this point. Realistically, that's not going to happen. But I think this is one of those games that would make you be concerned if the Revolution had to go to Yankee Stadium in the playoffs, what that game would look like. But again, that's not going to happen. Thankfully, the Revolution have built enough of a lead where that's not going to happen. But that would be something that would concern me if the Revolution had to do that. And again, another reason why it's so important the Revs have done so well this season to put themselves in such a good spot, where it looks like the first seed in the East is pretty much going to be theirs, even this far out. So at least knock on wood, the Revolution are never going to have to play Yankee Stadium in the playoffs. But if they did, that would be a bit concerning. But with that said, I did want to go into a few of the lineup decisions. And actually, I want to start with something we touched upon at the beginning. Chris, what are your thoughts on the fact that Carles Gil and Tajon Buchanan were suspended for this game? Obviously, it does not matter for Carles Gil. He was not going to be playing regardless. But Tajon in particular, what's your thought on the fact that, because he went away to Belgium to sign that contract and missed the All-Star game, he was suspended for this match? And really, the league missed out on him in the All-Star game, but then they also missed out on having one of the more exciting players to watch in the league playing this game.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me. I'm such an MLSer. I'm so pro MLS, and everything they do is awesome because it's all MLS and it's unique and it's interesting and it's different, and there's a lot of stupid things that they do, and I still stand behind them, and I'm just like, no, it's okay. It's MLS. It's just what it is. You got to embrace it. Man, I cannot embrace this. I don't understand this decision. I guess I understand it. They want to put out that product on that national scale and have Liga MX fans tune in and see the best that MLS has to offer, and maybe try to win in some fans and say, wow, I would like to watch those players more often. But I mean, how often is that going to happen? And why are you going to suspend your stars? These are the best players in your league, and you're going to suspend them because they're unable to make it. It's one thing if they're just like, nah, I don't feel like it, and they have zero reason to be missing it. But I mean, Carles Gil hasn't been playing for the Revolution, and you suspended because he didn't make an exhibition match. What? I mean, of course, it didn't make any difference whatsoever because he would not have played this game either way. But Tajon Buchanan, there's a good chance he would have played. I don't know what his flight schedule looks like. I don't know where from Belgium to Boston he is right now. I haven't been following him too much. Of course, I don't even think we've mentioned it, but Tajon Buchanan has been announced that he has signed a contract with Club Brugge, and now he has been loaned back to the Revolution for the remainder of the 2021 season. And while he was in Belgium signing that contract, that's when the All-Star game was happening, and now he's suspended because of that. It's just mind-boggling to me. Don Garber needs to correct this, get this right. Don't suspend your best players because they are just unable to play in an exhibition match. It's just so stupid. I'll let you go because I won't stop.
No, I mean, I get the logic behind the rule, and the NHL does the same thing. If you miss the All-Star game, you're suspended for a regular season game. I get the thought behind it. You don't want players skipping the All-Star game as your showcase, and there's a lot of guys that would probably like a rest that would choose to skip it. Some guys I think are excited about it, others aren't. But it wouldn't be fair if, say for example, Seattle had like 6 or 7 guys playing in this game. If they all went and then the Revolution guys decided to stay home and because the coach made up an injury or something, I get that, and you want to discourage that. But there's got to be some sort of reasonableness standard here, right? With Carles Gil, he had missed several games before. It's irrelevant in this case, but hypothetically, let's say he was working his way back and could have been available for this game. And if he'd missed 4 games before that, I think, if you're maybe you change the rule to, if you miss the game before, then you're not suspended if you miss the All-Star game. But if you don't miss the game before, you're suspended to kind of get around that issue. But then on the other side, Tajon Buchanan, they weren't pretending he was injured. He was flying to Belgium to sign a $7 million contract. Now, like if they had papered this, so Tajon had signed for Brugge on Tuesday, wasn't a Revolution player on Wednesday, and then was loaned back to the Revs on Thursday, would he have been suspended? That's my question, right? Could they have done something like that? And I think the way they actually did this is, I actually don't think he's being loaned back. I think it's more of the deal goes through on January 1, and I don't know if that's kind of to get around the transfer window situation. But hypothetically, if they had done that, like would that have worked? I don't know. There's just got to be some sort of common sense into this rule, and I think it's ridiculous that Tajon couldn't play. While at the same time recognizing I do see why there's some need for an incentive to stop guys just from pretending they're injured and skipping, but that was obviously not the case for either of these two players. So it's frustrating, and with Tajon, his days in MLS are numbered because we know he's going over to Belgium, and to have him miss a game for something silly like this is just unfortunate, not only for the Revolution but for the league, because he's an exciting player to watch.
100%. And I loved your analogy saying talking about NHL does this as well. I guess the one thing different, I think NHL plays 82 games in a season.
Yeah, that's very true.
MLS, you have 34 games. That's less than half the amount of games that you see in an NHL season. So it doesn't make sense to lose a star player for one game for this. And to your point, I do understand. I can see where it comes from. They're creating a product and they want the best players out to be involved in that product. And Tajon Buchanan was handpicked by Don Garber to be out there, and he didn't show up. So technically he's under contract from MLS. They can do what the hell they want. I just disagree with it.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. We talked to Bruce after the game. Frank Talapa asked him about Tajon, and he mentioned that somebody suggested to him that Tajon fly and miss the Cincinnati game instead of the All-Star game. So which to me implies that was a possibility. And Bruce said his priority is meaningful regular season games for the Revolution over the All-Star game, and I think that should be his priority. So if this was like punishment for choosing to have him fly out and miss the All-Star game instead of missing a Revs game. That's also ridiculous. But then on that note, Gustavo Bo, played in the All-Star game, came back Thursday. Bruce Arena opted to only play him 45 minutes because he said he didn't think it was fair to him. That to me makes a whole lot of sense, and that's just the reality of things. But that obviously hurt the Revs too, because as we said, Gustavo Bo is so crucial to the Revolution's, creating chances, especially when Carles Heel is out. And I think you saw that in the first half. And then I also think, again, New York City FC is a team where, they get a lead, you're in Yankee Stadium, it's going to be hard to break them down.
New York City coming into tonight's match is the third best defense. I think it's in MLS. Maybe it was just the Eastern Conference. I can't remember now exactly. But New York City's not an easy team to break down to begin with. And then you're going to give up the lead to them or, surrender a goal to them. And they're playing on the front foot. It's, like you said, it's not a good situation for the Revolution. It's uphill battle from the start. And now you're down a goal against a very good defensive team. It just, it wasn't the Revolution's night.
Yeah, and we got a lot of listener questions coming in, including I think about 3 that have come in since we started recording that I'm actively adding to our live template as we're talking. So we are going to jump into those. I think now's a good time. But before we do, I did want to quickly take a minute to talk about the sponsor of the podcast, Galacco Kits. Galacco Kits is the go-to place to bring you unique vintage jerseys to your home. The passion for the beautiful game doesn't have borders, and neither does the selection. And if you head to GalaccoKits.com today, you can get 15% off your order using the code RevsRecap. That's RevsRecap at checkout for 15% off your order at Galacco Kits. If you're enjoying the Revs season despite this loss, which you should be able to get over this one because of how good the Revs have been. There are a couple of 2020 Ray jerseys on there. There's a 2000 windbreaker. Good selection of Rev stuff currently. And as we mentioned last week, if you're a fan of Adam Buksa, there's the current Poland away kit available now. So as you head into this international break, which isn't really a break but should be a break, as we'll discuss later, and want to support Adam Buksa playing for Poland, head on to GalaccoKits.com, use code RevsRecap, and save 15% on that kit. And with that, we got a lot of great listener questions. We're going to jump right into those. The first comes from Sam Mitten on Twitter, Sam from the Bent Musket. He asked, does the result of this game matter at all in the grand scheme of things? What do you think, Chris?
In the grand scheme, not really. Going into the game, you told me before the game that this is going to be a loss for the Revolution. You kind of already knew it, kind of chalked it up. The Revolution have won so many games. They still have a lead in the Supporter Shield standings where they still control their own destiny, if you want to use that phrase. So in the grand scheme of things, probably not missing a lot of players. It's going to be a tough game to begin with. I think how they bounce back is going to make more of a difference in the grand scheme of the league and Supporter Shield and MLS Cup.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone on record as saying, I don't think the Revolution are going to get that best all-time points record of 72 points, and the past few weeks have made me start to reconsider that. But if your goal is for the Revolution to break the points record, losing this game might matter in the grand scheme of things. I think that could hurt, but I don't think that's important. I don't think that's what the Revolution should be looking towards. It's it would be a nice thing to have, but I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's important. And with this loss, the Revolution are down to 2.13 points per game, which is still slightly higher than LAFC's record 2.12. But obviously it leaves the margin for error a lot smaller. Again, I don't think that's important. What's important is winning the Supporter Shield and winning the MLS Cup. And in the grand scheme of things, I don't think this impacts that much. The Revolution have nice leads in both of those. Seattle might bring it within 4 points. I don't know if they're playing tonight or tomorrow. They might bring it within 4 points. I'm playing tomorrow, I guess, against Portland, so that'll be an interesting game to watch. But the Revolution are still in a very good place, and this was far from the Revolution's first team lineup. It was in a difficult situation in New York City. It doesn't matter that much, and in some sense, it's not a bad thing for the Revolution to face some adversity. Things are almost going too smooth for them in recent weeks, where it's good to get this out of the way now rather than in the playoffs, and maybe this is something they can learn from. I am honestly not sure they can learn too much from this game. The players after the game were saying they could learn from this one, so maybe they can, but I'm not sure there's too much you can learn from this. But yeah, I'm with you. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter that much unless you're really focused on breaking that 72 points record, which it is what it is.
Maybe the loss could be some of Bill Belichick's early 2000 cliche humble pie. Maybe that's what this game is. Maybe that's what we could take away in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really important is that, and if you listen to the Far Post podcast this week, they talked about that. I think what's really important is that the Revolution go into the playoffs with momentum and on a hot streak. So if you're going to have a bump in the road, and this is a bump in the road, and you know what, maybe next weekend will be too, because next weekend the Revolution are going to be missing a lot of these same guys and some different guys. Philadelphia's going to be missing a lot of guys too, so it's kind of a game you can write off. But maybe the Revolution lose 2 games in a row, and then that's really kind of a bad patch for the Revolution, but an understandable one. And if they take that, lose those 2 games, and then turn things back around and go on a winning streak, nobody's going to care. And if anything, maybe that helped them to kind of have that adversity and get it out of the system.
Just remember though, Sean, good teams don't lose 2 games in a row.
That's true. That's true. That is one of the quotes from Brad Friedel that I actually kind of like.
Yes.
But so on that note, Mike Kennedy, who got his question in just in time, asked us, is tonight's loss a result of fatigue, good tactics, an off night, or some combination? Curious on your take. What do you think on that one, Chris?
I think we kind of gone back and forth quite a bit already on what the precedings were and what has happened during the game that culminated in the loss. I think it's a concoction of all of those things. There's maybe not so much fatigue. You want to say there's fatigue with Gustavo Bo or Matt Turner. Maybe you could say that. I don't think Matt Turner's to blame for this. I don't think Gustavo Bo is to blame for the loss tonight. Tactics. I mean, I don't really know what the tactics were, because anytime they tried to connect any sort of play together, any passes together, it was just a sloppy turnover fest. There was a lot of, maybe it is fatigue, because those legs looked very heavy all game. After about 25 minutes or so, it just looked like everyone on the Revolution was done. So maybe there was some fatigue playing in there. I don't know where it would have come from. Maybe the 90 degrees that they've been training in lately has been a bit much. I don't know. We could speculate anything in the world as to what has been going on and why the players have put out such a lousy performance. But I think it just really comes down to it being an off night, the fact that there's a lot of rotation in the lineup, and there was just no creativity. There wasn't a lot of desire to do much. There was one shot on goal. Is that correct? That was the last stat that I saw. I don't know if there was any that came in late. There was a ton of corner kicks. There's a ton of chances. Nothing's put on frame. So, it was just one of those nights. You got to kind of take it on the chin and move on.
Yeah, and on the chances, when you talked about Adam Buch's good performance, which it was, the one thing you could knock him on is he did have a couple chances he could have done better on, especially in the first 10 minutes, where you had that 4th minute chance that kind of got open. It was a shot from distance. It was a bouncing ball, but he sent it well high of the net. I think he should have done better on that chance. And then in the 10th minute, I actually kind of thought it looked like he committed a foul, but there were 2 defenders in front of him. He managed to create some space, and good job for him creating space and not getting a foul called. I thought there was a little push in there, but he headed from close range just wide. Again, it was difficult. There were 2 defenders on him, but I think he could have done better on those 2 chances. And Charlie Davies even said, it's the 10th minute, and Adam Buch could have had 2 goals by now. So that was unfortunate, but there wasn't enough from the Revolution. You're right. They did finish with only 1 shot on target. I think they had 12 shots in total. So the fact they only put 1 of those on frame is not a great ratio.
I even think back to Boateng's, where he intercepted it in the middle of the pitch there, and he came up and he just made a nice run all by himself, and then took a shot, and it just, I don't know. Everything went wide of the net tonight. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
No, that was a good one because Boateng took a shot with his right foot, and I don't think he's a particularly two-footed player, and I think it showed on that play. He might have had an opportunity actually to pass it to Buxa, I think, on that one. Although it wasn't a clean pass, but I think that probably would have been his better option given what we saw from his right foot.
yes.
But yeah, no, I agree. It was a combination of things. I don't, unless you're going to blame fatigue for Gustavo Bo not starting this game, I don't think you can blame fatigue. But it was the first game in a while where the Revolution have actually had a full week of rest. So I wouldn't blame fatigue, but there's plenty of other things to blame. Patrick Martin on Twitter had a few questions. The first one was, we won't see Carles Gil until October. Can't see us sustaining this lack of starters going through World Cup qualifying. Could have a rough stretch ahead without Turner, Carles Gil, Tajon, Buxa, Brandon Bai potentially hurt. Is it going to catch up to us? But that was not his question. So that was a big lead up for him to ask, why is this field ever used? Complete trash. I gotta start off on this one because you've talked about this a little bit already. I think that New York is the one team with a worse stadium situation than the Revolution. Well, maybe Chicago too, but New York City, I think, is arguably the one team with the worst stadium situation than the Revolution. And the reason the field's used, which I think this question was probably a bit sarcastic or facetious, the reason the field's used is because of the location and the fact that the team is part owned by the Yankees. So it's a convenient thing. Is that, hey, we have the stadium in New York City and we want this team to be playing in New York City proper. That's why they're playing there. But it's terrible. They need to get a soccer-specific stadium. We've seen how hard it is for the Revolution to try to do so over, 20 years now. New York's been trying a lot less time, but they're not any closer than the Revolution are. So it's terrible to watch games there, and they are, I think, number one on the list of teams that need their own stadium ASAP.
Well, and you're talking about the footing on the field too. I feel like players were slipping all over the pitch. I mean, you even think back to Boateng on that corner kick in the 23rd minute. It just went up and it didn't even enter the field of play. It went straight out for a goal kick. It wasn't even close. I think not Brian Cameron over on Twitter made the joke that was an E11 on your scorecards because you're at the baseball field. You got to mark down your errors, but it was a really, really bad play, and it was a culmination of. Not a culmination, that was a bad word there, but it was just something that we were seeing repetitively over and over again. Players losing their footing left and right. I don't know what's going on with the pitch there, but of course we have the infield with that sod overlay. I don't know. I can go on and on about how much I can't stand watching the Revolution play at Yankee Stadium. It's not a good place to play soccer.
But I do want to quickly go back to his first lead-in that didn't really have to do with the question.
Yeah,
because you and I were talking before about World Cup qualifiers, and it is going to be very difficult for the Revolution against Philadelphia. Although Philadelphia might be missing just as many, if not more. I haven't looked at the final call-ups, but they have several internationals as well. So it might be equally weakened rosters for that game. But it's the only game that these players are guaranteed to miss is that game. Because, the international break goes through that Wednesday, and then the Revolution have a game Saturday. So, there's a good chance some of these guys come back and maybe don't start that game for the same reason Gustavo Bo didn't start this game. But the only game they're guaranteed to miss is that Philly game, and then the Revolution are off the next time there's an international break in, I think, October. The Revolution don't play during that stretch. So it's going to be tough next weekend, but that's really the only game that they have to miss. So it's not that bad. And again, the only reason they're missing that game is because the Revolution were supposed to be playing Philadelphia on September 15th. But because of Philadelphia having a good year last year and making the CONCACAF Champions League, this game was rescheduled for the international break. So it's unfortunate that the Revolution are playing, but it really is just this one weekend, and it could be a lot worse. So, again, it might result in the Revolution losing 2 games in a row, but if that's all that happens and the Revolution recover from that, they're still in good shape. Patrick also had another question, and this is the same question a bunch of people asked. He says, can we get a guy to take a decent corner and give Buxa a shot? No more playing short or corners that don't clear the near post defender. Give the guy that leads the league in air challenges a word I'm not going to say because we're a clean podcast chance. And then Michael on Discord said, do you think Bo should be taking corner kicks? And then Oscar Liberos said, why does Bo keep taking all the corners? It makes no sense. And we saw Boateng of course, before Gustavo Bo was in, take a few corners in the first half. His first corner was absolutely terrible, and I think never even entered the field of play and went straight into the side of the net. But then he had a couple that were decent. I actually didn't think the corner kick service was. I mean, it was a mixed bag. I think about 50% of them were good. It was a mixed bag in this game. But they did have some chances off of corners, I thought. What did you think of the corners, and who do you think should be taking the corners with Carles Heel out?
Yeah, I'm okay with a mix of Boateng, McNamara, and Tristison taking corners. I know everyone's going to jump on me for saying McNamara should be taking corners, but he could deliver an okay ball every once in a while. It's just as a matter of when you're going to see that ball come in. I know the Revolution kind of changed up their tactics late in the first half and switched to a lot of short corners. Or maybe that was even in the second half. I don't remember exactly now. But they did switch it up, and they started doing a lot of short corners because all of their in-swingers or out-swingers, whatever you want to call them, just weren't reaching the middle of the 6-yard box where Henry Kessler and Adam Bucha are just waiting to try to head it home. And actually, it was in the second half because that was when Gustavo Bo was driving him in, and he was doing pretty poor of it. And he's a guy that I don't want taking corners. I want him putting the ball in the net. So I am 100% with Patrick and Michael and Oscar and anyone else that tweeted at us mentioning the same exact thing. I don't know why Gustavo Bo is on the corners. You got to throw one of the midfielders out there, someone that's not going to be an integral part of receiving the corner. It should be taking it. And in my opinion, Tristison is probably the best option out there. Boateng, fine. You want to throw him there. He's a short guy. I don't care. Get the short guys taking corners. I'm big on height. So as long as, Matt Polster's not taking it, Henry Kessler's not taking it, Adam Bucha's not taking it, and Gustavo Bo's not taking it, then I don't really care who's out there as long as they can just whip it in. That's what it comes down to for me. I don't know if you have a different take, Sean.
No, I agree with all that, and I thought Boateng was actually, other than that first one, which is absolutely terrible and inexcusable, I thought Boateng was actually pretty decent at his corner kicks. But my main thing is I don't want Gustavo Bo taking corners. I want him either in the box or kind of at the top of the box to pick up any scraps because he's too good of a finisher. And I also hate when he's out wide for like a short corner and sometimes they just ignore him. And I don't want Gustavo Bo having anything to do with the corner kicks other than being in the box or at the top of the box. So that's that. I agree with all those comments as well, and I agree with you. Eric on Twitter asked, what does this match tell us besides the fact our roster doesn't work as a futsal team? God, that field is trash. I think we've kind of covered what it tells us. The main thing it tells me is that if you're missing your 3 best creative players, you're in trouble, which is not surprising. And also that, the Revolution don't want to have to play at Yankee Stadium in the playoffs, which is also, barring a disaster, not going to happen. Is there anything I missed there, Chris? Well, and your takeaway on DeJuan Jones, I think, relevant as well.
Yeah, no, I don't think you missed anything on that. I did want to quickly jump back to Patrick's first comment, by the way. He says we won't see Heel until October. I want to make sure that listeners know that that's not nothing that we're putting out as fact. I'm guessing that's Patrick's assumption that we won't see Heel till October, but I just wanted to clarify that real quick. There still is no time frame for his return. So
no, thank you for that clarification. And it is extremely frustrating that there is no time frame for that return. So I don't blame him for assuming that we're not hearing anything.
Yep. But yeah, sorry, Eric, I don't have anything else to add to that. It's the team does not work as a futsal team. Maybe we could try beach soccer next. That's what it is.
Mike Rayner on Twitter has more of an observation than a comment. New York City FC splits playing at Yankee Stadium and everywhere else are insane. They're 4-0-1 there with 17 goals for and 2 goals against, which that is insane. And other than that, they're 6-6-3 with 18 goals for and 17 goals against everywhere else. So those are crazy numbers. The Far Post podcast actually talked about that last week, and I think they were kind of going through the teams that they'd played at home, and it wasn't a particularly impressive list of teams that they played at home until the Revolution. So some of that you can write off as, they're blowing out teams like Cincinnati that's struggling, and I think maybe Orlando. So that's not shocking. Still very impressive, but again, it's very hard to play at Yankee Stadium, and I think they've had, for the most part, not that difficult of a schedule at Yankee Stadium. But it also, when you're talking about power rankings and you're trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, it does make you wonder where they would be if they had been able to play all their games at Yankee Stadium and weren't playing some of them, at Red Bull Arena or elsewhere.
Yeah, I didn't know about the statistic until literally just now, and I'm kind of gobsmacked. I gotta say, that's outrageous to see how good they've been in Yankee Stadium. I mean, it makes sense too. They're used to playing there, and it's their home ground. But I mean, they definitely didn't look that good when they were playing at Red Bull Arena. So
No.
yeah, that's it's shocking to me. I don't have much to comment on because I was just really surprised to see that statistic.
James Downing says, is it bad that I really don't care about this stupid loss on this stupid field? I think that's a sentiment shared by a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't think that anyone should really be dwelling on this one too much. There's a lot of elements or a lot of I can't find the right word, but there's a lot of pieces of this match going into it that just are not in the Revolution's favor. They had a lot to overcome if they were going to come away with 1 or 3 points. I still think that maybe they should have come away with a point, and that's kind of my opinion now going into every away match is a 1 point or bust, and they didn't even challenge for it. So it's definitely disappointing from that aspect. But there, like I said, I've said it now 3 times. This has been an uphill battle for the Revolution. Don't dwell on it. If this is becoming a trend, of course, then we got to start worrying, hit the panic button. But this is just one game, and on to Philadelphia.
Yeah, I mean it's understandable. If I think again, like I said, when I saw that lineup the Revolution were putting out and knowing who they were playing, I wasn't shocked by the result. Traeger Durati on Twitter also says this New York City FC field compromised the integrity of the games played there. I think we've talked enough about that to
Yeah, was there something up with the field tonight? Yeah.
yeah. He also asked, I think a more relevant question though is how do so many men get wide open on a field half the size of a regulation field? I think that's a valid question to ask. One thing that we didn't really talk about is the Revs defending set pieces. They didn't get scored on a set piece, but there were a few times they could have been scored on set pieces where guys got wide open on set pieces. And that to me is, again, regardless of what pitch you're playing on, kind of inexcusable. And I think that's a situation that the Revolution have kind of been lucky on this season that they haven't been burned more on, because there have been a lot of times this year where I've noticed guys have gotten open on set pieces and, the marking hasn't been good enough.
100%. And even look, the game started that way. The 3rd minute, there was a set piece for New York City. Medina was, I think he was might have been in an offside position. I'm not sure exactly where he was, but completely unmarked, all by himself. He was given time to take down the ball in the box on a set piece. It was delivered into the box. He was given time to take it down, let the ball settle, and then take a shot. You can't allow players time like that. There was a lot of bad set piece defending and even set piece attacking, if you want to call it that too, from the Revolution tonight. It was just bad all around. But it is another thing too, when you talk about the size of the field, how did the players get so open? Because it wasn't just the set pieces, like you had mentioned. It was all around. I don't know. I don't want to start another rant, but it's just so frustrating with this pitch and the fact that New York City knows how to work their way through it and how to take advantage of the space that they have and find these open pockets. The Revolution just looked like they had never played on a field that small, and it's we keep ragging on it, but it's not that small. Like, yes, it's small in comparison. It's probably the smallest pitch any of these players will ever play on in a professional or even exhibition match. As far as their professional careers are going, but you can't put so much on the size of the pitch. It's still there. Everyone has to play on the same size field. We said it, or I say it at least week in, week out. You can only play the team that you're facing. You can only play on the field that you're faced or that you're scheduled to play on, and you kind of got to deal with the elements. And the Revolution didn't do that. Credit again to NYC because they took their chances, they found their space, and they made it happen.
Yeah, and just one thing I wanted to add is we've talked about trust and maybe disappointed a little bit on the field, but one thing I want to give him credit for is he was asked after the game by Frank Delapa about the field and about no Carlos Hill, no Buchanan. Frank basically teed him up with a bunch of excuses, and I think he responded great in saying, there's no excuse for the performance we had today. We cannot have the missing players or the field as excuses, and that's the right attitude. We've made a lot of excuses for the Revs today, but at the end of the day, it wasn't a good performance, and there's plenty of reasons for that, but they lost and they need to be better. It's easy to write this game off, but I think there are some things you can learn from it. And on that note, John Useglio on Twitter asked, what do you think this team's greatest weakness is aside from the injuries, and realistically, what chance do you give this team to win MLS Cup? And I think we talked about some of their greatest weaknesses in the set piece defending and some of the defending we saw tonight. I mean, to me, the defense still has some question marks, right?
100% defense still has question marks, and I think that this has been a recurring theme. Even in games where the Revolution are winning and not necessarily surrendering any goals, we're still looking at the defense and saying it's a little suspect. We're kind of surprised that more goals are not being allowed. And you look at Matt Turner's statistics and you see his goals allowed versus expected goals to allowed. I don't have the stat in front of me right now, but you're looking at it, and that's a lot. Matt Turner's a huge reason as to why the Revolution don't allow more goals than they do. That back line has been very vulnerable at points. And tonight, it was essentially the starting back line, right? Mafla is expected to be the left back. I wouldn't say he's been as good as DeJuan Jones, but we did have DeJuan Jones over on the right-hand side. And, of course, that's not his the side that he's now used to. But it's still DeJuan Jones out there, and we still had Henry Kessler. We still had Andrew Farrell, and then Matt Turner in net, and it's still not doing enough. The defense is 100% where I'm looking when we're talking weakness and wondering what it takes to get this together. Maybe it's the Matt Polster effect, and now it was great to see Matt Polster get out there in the second half and see that he's healthy and he's working back to game fitness, I'm guessing. So that's very encouraging to see, and maybe once he gets out there, that back line is going to be a little bit more solidified. Once Brandon Bye gets back out there, maybe that's going to help bring things together. And I guess I'm playing into the caveat of the question of without talking about injuries, but the back line still makes me worry. I'm not worried about this team scoring goals. They average 2 goals a game going into tonight. Of course, they didn't score tonight, but I'm okay with that average of goals. I mean, they're the highest scoring team in MLS by several goals, so I'm sure nobody has overtaken them in one night. But the back line 100% is where I'm focused on. Sean, I've left the midfield for you if that's where you're looking, but for me, it's the back line.
No, I'm with you. It's the back line, and I think in particular set piece defending is a weakness for this team. And like I said, I don't want to dig into it because I just did, but that's an area that I think the Revolution could have been burned on more than they have been this season. So that's something that would concern me. It's hard to say aside from injuries, but I do think the Revolution backline when everyone's healthy is solid enough. But I think that's also the area where if one guy gets hurt, any guy gets hurt, that the downgrade or what it does to the defense, not necessarily just talent wise, but kind of cohesion wise, is pretty big, more so than just about anywhere else in the field. So yeah, that to me is the greatest weakness. And then the second part, what realistically, what chance do you give the team to win MLS Cup? It goes back to what we've talked about before. I think if the Revolution hold on to the number 1 overall seed, I think they have a very good chance of winning MLS Cup. I think if the Revolution end up dropping the Supporter Shield and, Seattle takes it and Seattle, breezes through the playoffs. And again, that's a lot of ifs, but hypothetically, if the Revolution end up in a final against Seattle on the road, my money's on Seattle, not the Revs. But if the Revolution win the Supporter Shield, I think they have a very good chance. In my mind, I think Seattle and the Revolution are by far the 2 best teams in MLS this year, and a healthy Seattle team might be better than a healthy Revolution team. So if the Revolution have to go on the road to play them, I don't favor the Revolution in that at all. But I think if the Revolution, where they're going, if they hold on to the Supporter Shield, I think they have a really good chance to win MLS Cup, the best chance that they've ever had. And part of that's because, the way things work now, it would be at Gillette Stadium, where in the past it was at a neutral ground. So, when the Revolution were losing those MLS Cups, with the exception of 2002, which was actually at Gillette Stadium, but that was, kind of a weird one, because I think that was the one MLS Cup where the Revolution on paper were huge underdogs. But so it's a long-winded way of saying I think the Revolution have a good chance this year, and I think it's their best chance they've ever had.
Yep. And, I love that you're talking about Seattle in this conversation, because they absolutely should be there. But when we're also looking at Seattle, there's one player on the team that I'm looking at and saying, Revolution could really use someone like that right now. And that player is Kellen Rowe. And he's been week in, week out impacting the Seattle Sounders and helping them grind out wins and just keep moving through the Western Conference and just dominating. Kellen Rowe, it's unreal to see how much impact he's actually had on that team. Maybe he's not scoring all the goals or getting on all the highlights, but he's been a very solid piece defensively. Essentially in the midfield, he's been very stable. And I think the Revolution have absolutely missed having a stable piece in the midfield. He's not going to replace Carles Gil, but giving a partner or some sort of player to, kind of be the link between Matt Polster and Carles Gil, or whoever's going to be playing that 10 spot, I think Kellen Rowe would be such a great fit for that spot. And I think it's really too bad that the Revolution let him go in this offseason. As far as, there's a long-winded Kellen Rowe sidebar just because I'm a big Kellen Rowe fan. But as far as back to the question, the chance I give the team to win MLS Cup, you want to talk percentages, I would say it's probably over 50%. When it comes to if they can make it to MLS Cup. If they're playing in the match, I think I give them a greater than 50% chance to win. I don't care who the opponent is. As far as getting there, it's going to be a challenge. I think they have a very good chance. I don't know what percentage I would put on it. There's going to be a lot of good teams, a lot of hungry teams that they're going to be going up against. And I wouldn't be surprised if New York City is up there again.
Yeah, and, looking at the history of MLS, the Supporter Shield's winners don't win MLS Cup very frequently. So it's, the best team in the regular season doesn't always win MLS Cup. And, that LAFC team that we keep talking about and how good they were, they didn't win MLS Cup. They lost it in the Western Conference final to who else but the Seattle Sounders. So so it's, at home, they lost a game to Seattle. So there's no guarantee when it gets to the playoffs. It's kind of a crapshoot. But by being the top seed and guaranteeing yourself home field advantage throughout, that's a huge edge. So I give the Revolution a better chance than anybody else of winning MLS Cup this year. But anything can happen. Anything can happen. But again, I think this is the best chance the Revs have ever had, given how the playoffs are lined up and given how good they've been in the regular season, and given that they should be that number one overall seed. So we'll see what happens. Ratio God on Twitter, I think, asked a question that we've kind of answered. What is the difference between tonight and the last 11 games unbeaten? I think it was actually 9 games unbeaten. 11 games unbeaten would be the Revs record, or tied for the Revs record. Lack of attack, no fight, players not fully focused. I guess he's giving us different options than we had earlier, Chris. Lack of attack, no fight, players not fully focused. Which ones of those would you pin tonight?
No fight or focused. I mean, it's tough. All of the above.
Defensively, really. Yeah.
It's they seem not focused. They seemed to just I still don't understand half of the passes that they made. First of all, I don't think they were smart passes to begin with, and second of all, I don't think they executed any pass very well. They just kept tapping the ball and it went straight to New York City's feet, and I was like, what are you doing? That's the opposition. You're supposed to get the ball away from them, not give it to them. There's I don't know, so many different areas. If I had to pick one out of those three, lack of attack, no fight, or players not focused, I would just say it was no fight. It just looked like very few players on the team showed up to compete. I'll say Matt Turner showed up to compete. You could hear him on the broadcast loud and clear, screaming at the officials. We can't repeat that here on the podcast, though. I'll say Buxa was there to compete. He had a hell of a game, like I said. Of course, his finishing was a little bit off. Doesn't take away from his compete level. And then aside from that, I put Matt Polster. I think he was hungry to get back in there, and it was really nice to see him once he got his feet back under him.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree a little bit, and I think it was more the no fight kind of number 3 on this list, because I actually thought the Revolution started this game decently. The Revolution have been notoriously bad at starting games this season, and I thought that would be the case when I saw this lineup. But I actually thought they started okay. It was a fairly even match until New York City FC scored. Although I guess in saying that, there wasn't much fight when they fell behind. So maybe I'm reconsidering that as I'm speaking. But I will say that I thought they started the game okay, all things considered, and kind of fell apart after that goal was scored and didn't show enough fight to come back. So I've talked myself out of my initial answer. We have some kind of various questions here that are less about this game. 3 of them that we'll go through quickly. James Downing on Twitter wanted to know, on the appearance record, do you put Farrell or Fagundes in the same camp as Reese and Joseph? Is Farrell a club legend? And I think you can kind of divide those into 2 separate questions. At least I would. But Chris, I'll let you take it first.
So I'm going to start with Farrell and address the club legend thing. I mean, is this still a question? Why are we still talking about this? He literally holds the record now for the most appearances in a Revolution uniform. Of course he's a legend. That's kind of the epitome of a legend, is, holding a record like that, especially specifically like an appearance record. He's been with the club through so much. He's been to MLS Cup with the Revolution. I can only think of one other player on the roster that can say that, and he doesn't get any minutes. Of course, we talk about Scott Caldwell, and I just don't understand why everyone wants to know, is Farrell still a club legend? I mean, he's starting. He's played every single minute this season for the New England Revolution. He's the only player on the roster that has played every single minute this season for the Revolution, which is also mind-boggling to me. It's just absurd. And everyone's still asking, is he a club legend? I don't get it. Why is that a question? Yes, absolutely, 100%. He's a club legend. I know, Sean, you and I talked a little bit once we got this question in at first, saying, would he be considered on the Mount Rushmore, if you want to take that metaphor and say, is he among the 4 best Revolution players ever? Maybe he's not in there. I think he has a conversation to there's an argument to be made for him to be there, because he has been with the Revolution now and he's played more games than anybody else, and I think that might be qualification enough to be on that. But I understand statistically, and you want to look maybe more at the attackers and the more statistical impact players, that's fine. But Farrell as a club legend, 110%. I'm going to throw it back to you, Sean, and let you maybe take the Reese and Joseph piece or the Fagundes piece.
Well, I got to ask you too, do you think Fagundes is a club legend?
Yes, in a different way. Not because of almost breaking the record for most appearances in a Revs uniform, but I'd say for the way that he came in, and he kind of changed the way that the club kind of operated in a sense, where he came in as this 14-year-old kid from Leominster, Massachusetts, and he just lit it up. He was such a rising star, something that the Revolution had never seen, was teenager making waves and becoming a fan favorite. So just in his own right, just, paving a way, I guess, for the Revolution, and to, really see how youth can come in and make an impact on your team. And then, as he's been with the club for so long, he's got 51 goals, I think it is, with the Revolution, which is a huge number in itself, especially considering he's a midfielder. So yeah, Fagundes is a legend, just in a different light than Andrew Farrell.
Yeah, I for the most part agree with you. I think Andrew Farrell, he's your all-time leader in appearances. He's been with the team his whole career. I don't know how you would say he's not a club legend. And I think Diego Fagundes, like you said, first player from the academy, it started extremely young with the team. It got an insane amount of appearances as well. I think he's absolutely a club legend. There's other, we're not asked about it, but there's other guys that some people don't sometimes consider a club legend, which baffles me. Like a Jay Heaps sometimes gets left out of that conversation. He's absolutely a club legend for, I think, even more reasons, because of how many MLS Cup, he was every single MLS Cup the Revs have been to, he's either been in as a player or the coach, and same with the US Open Cup and Superliga, which is just absolutely insane. Every time they've been in a final, he's been a part of that in some way. So he's absolutely a club legend. Sometimes he gets left out. I know that's a side rant that we weren't asked about, but I had to throw that in there. I still think it's ridiculous he wasn't part of that all-time team that came out last year. But it's very, there's some very weird logic used by people. And I think, some of the same people that would say Chris Tierney is a club legend don't include Farrell as a club legend. And that to me is insane, because Farrell is more of a club legend than Tierney in my mind. And, I think if you're trying to talk about level of talent, I don't think that Tierney was a more talented left back than Farrell is center back either. But so that, I don't know, all those guys to me are club legends. When you talk about the same camp as Reese and Shari Joseph, also club legends, that's where it gets complicated, because I think if you look at the concept of a Mount Rushmore, which is, the four, which you're limited to four players, I think the difference between a Reese, a Joseph, a Twellman, and a Ralston, who right now would be the Revs Mount Rushmore, I think in my mind, and I think in most people's mind, is all of those guys had the longevity. They didn't have as many appearances as Farrell, but they had a ton of appearances for the Revolution, but also had seasons where they were in conversations as the best player in their position. There were seasons where Taylor Twellman was the best striker in MLS. There were a lot of seasons where Steve Ralston was the best right midfielder in MLS. There were a lot of seasons where Shari Joseph was the best defensive midfielder in MLS. And there were some seasons where Matt Reese was at least in the conversation for the best goalkeeper in MLS. I don't think there's ever really been a season where Andrew Farrell has been in the conversation as the best defender or the best center back in MLS, which, again, doesn't stop him from being a club legend, because he's been a very good defender over his career and, very solid and consistent for the Revolution, just not quite at kind of the superstar level of the best at his position. And that to me kind of puts those four guys in a separate category from Farrell, and why I think they're the Mount Rushmore. And I think Carles Heel, if he stays in the Revolution for any significant more period of time, is going to have a very strong case for breaking into that Mount Rushmore. But right now I would say next in line might be Lee Nguyen, because Lee Nguyen had a lot of appearances for the Revolution, was an MVP candidate for the league, put up fantastic attacking numbers. So they're in the same category in that they're club legends, but I do think that there's a step above, with Matt Reese, Shari Joseph, Taylor Twellman, and Steve Ralston, that a guy like Carles Heel has a very good chance of getting to. And the only thing that he's missing is longevity, because his performances certainly justify it. But I don't think Farrell will ever quite get to that level, just because, as good as he is, he's never really been the best at his position or in the conversation for the best at his position.
I mean, he made the MLS All-Star team in 2016.
He did, but he also was never really a U.S. national team contender for playing time, and has never been an MLS Best 11. So I he's a club legend, but I don't put him in quite in the same class as Reese, Joseph, Twellman, and Ralston, who are kind of in a class of their own, with the next tier being Carles Heel, who's going to get to that class if he stays here, and Lee Nguyen, who came very close to getting to that class, but probably the only thing missing for him was kind of a little bit more longevity. So
I think that's a fair point, so can't argue that.
James Downey had another question. He mentions that Justin Rennicks is on $110,000 salary. Isn't that kind of high? Is that the contract the result of a Mike Burns special and the whole Celtic interest? I'll leave that one to you, Chris, to take a first stab at. The one thing I will say, though, is because he's a homegrown player, I don't believe that counts against the salary cap. I think he's a supplemental roster guy, so it's kind of irrelevant what his salary is, as long as it's not counting against the salary cap. But what's your take on this one?
Yeah, first of all, I mean, that's absurdly high for a player that gets most, if not all, of his minutes with the USL League One team. Can you tell me any USL players that are, a standard starter for their USL team that's making, more than...
There's probably some other guys in similar situations that are homegrowns for other teams. If I looked into it off the top of my head, no, I can't.
Yeah, no, it's just I've followed some USL careers, and I know they're making enough money to pay rent in their apartment and have a little bit of extra money left over to pay their car financing and stuff like that, and to buy some shoes or something like that. They're not making a lot of money down there. $110,000 a year is a ton of money, especially for a player that not even in USL Championship. He's playing in USL 1. And I haven't seen his stats so much this year, but I haven't heard a whole lot about Rennicks necessarily doing great this year.
No,
I know he's been coming up, and he's been on the bench now a couple of times for the Revolution first team, which is a good thing for him, but He's got to start getting some minutes with the first team to justify that sort of salary. Again, if it doesn't count towards the salary cap, it's all fun money. It's all Garber bucks. Who cares anyway? But if we're just taking that out of the element, just looking at the salary, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to make that much money for the sort of return that he's providing.
I'm going to agree with all that, but then I'm going to go back and say I don't blame Mike Burns for this one because he signed him coming off of a very impressive U20 World Cup. There was interest there's interest in Scotland. He had trained with clubs in Germany. If you recall, it actually seemed very unlikely he was ever going to sign for the Revs because he had gone off and trained in Germany without the Revs' permission. They suspended him. It didn't seem like relationships were very good. And I think Revolution fans would have been very annoyed with the Revolution organization if they hadn't found a way to sign him and lost a homegrown player to Europe. So I don't think it was a bad move by Mike Burns. I think the Revolution did the right thing signing him, a guy that had gone up through their academy and that there was interest in from overseas. In hindsight, it looks like a bad contract, but at the time, it made a lot of sense. With all that said, though, I will say that there were a few people. I'm not someone that gets many opportunities to watch the Revolution Academy play, so I'm not going to say I saw a lot of Rennicks, but there are people that I trust that see more of the academy than I did. That when the Revolution were signing him, were telling me that they thought the hype was too much for Justin Rennicks, that he was more of kind of he wasn't a guy that, was going to beat people on the dribble. He was more of kind of a poacher. And I think you saw that in the U20 World Cup. He scored some good goals, but they were more of, cleaning up the scraps. And that takes a skill to do that. That's a good skill to have. But I think that's also something that the Revolution don't really need, especially with Gustavo Bo and Adam Buxa. He was never going to get time for the first team in that role. And I think we've seen him try to become more of a winger or, playing out wide or playing different roles that don't necessarily suit his skill set. I just don't think he's the player that fans thought he was going to be when the Revolution signed him. I think there was so much hype around him, and I don't think he ever deserved quite that level of hype. But all of that is to say that, despite all this, despite the fact that he's probably making more money than he should be making, I don't blame Mike Burns. I think it was kind of a no-brainer decision that the Revolution signed this guy from their academy who was attracting interest overseas and who was playing on the U20 World Cup team.
Yeah, and I just want to add as well on topic of Justin Rennicks, looking at that under-20 World Cup team that played, one of the other players on that team is Indiana Vasilev, and I thought Indiana Vasilev was maybe a little bit better. I did watch that under-20 tournament, and I thought Indiana Vasilev was really the standout player from that team, and he is now getting regular minutes, or maybe not regular, but he's getting minutes on a consistent basis with Miami. I can't think of it, Inter Miami, which is nice to see that he's now breaking into the scene on the professional scene, making an impact and contributing to his club. And maybe that's something where Justin Rennicks is kind of at that same level, and possibly haven't seen the last of Justin Rennicks trying to make a push for a professional level amount of playing time. Maybe there's more to come for Justin Rennicks. Is kind of what I'm saying. If Indiana Vasilev is just starting to hit his stride now.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing you have to say is, he's a guy that's competing for minutes at the same spot that Buxa plays at, that Buo plays at, and that Teal Bunbury, who has his detractors, but it's still a guy that can score double digits in MLS, plays at. So that's a lot of veteran competition for him to beat out, to play at the position that he's best at, because he is best as a forward, not as some sort of winger, at least from what I've seen. So it's there's a lot of reasons why it's difficult for him, to break through. It's unfortunate for him. I wouldn't write him off yet. But there's a lot there. So I don't know. It's a tough one. If I were a betting man, I don't think he is ever going to break through for the first team, but I still don't think it was a mistake for Mike Burns to sign him to the contract that he did back then. And I think if they hadn't, every Revs fan would be asking what if and why did we let this guy from our academy go?
Hey, maybe a reunion down in Birmingham with Jay Heaps is in the cards for Justin Rennicks. Who knows?
I got to go back to one question we missed, which goes back to what I was just talking about. Oscar Liberos on Twitter says, Teal Bunbury is a USL quality player. Prove me wrong. Should not be starting in MLS. Chris, this seems harsh to me. What do you think?
He's the Golden Boot winner for the Revolution for 2020. I don't know how you could justify that. There was nobody else on the roster that had a better output than Teal Bunbury in 2020 when you're talking goals scored. You want to say Teal Bunbury has his moments where he could do better? Absolutely. I think every player does. But you know what? I think Teal Bunbury's maybe his misses, maybe his mishaps, whatever you want to call them, are typically a bit more extravagant, if you will, than other players. You know, when he takes a shot from just outside the 6-yard box and it goes out for a throw in, you know, those are the plays that you kind of remember. People don't think about as much the play that he does off the ball, how he does, you know, positionally, and how mentally smart he is in understanding the game, and how fast he is too. You know, and MLS is not too fast for him still. He's, I don't know how old he is, 32, 33. But this league
still only
is
31.
31. Okay, so even better. You know, I was taking him down a couple notches, but 31 years old, he's still showing that he has what it takes to be on an MLS roster. I think I don't know. I don't know where this necessarily came from. That he's a USL level player. I think that he's right now a quality depth piece. I think that's a good spot for him. And you know what? He can play on the wing as well too, which I wish Bruce Arena would kind of experiment with a little bit more, considering how much trouble it has been to find consistency on the wings.
Yeah, I mean, Teal Bunbury is a very streaky player. He's a very there's a lot of opinions on Tajon Buchanan from the Revolution fan base. That's nothing new. Some people love him, some people don't love him. He's absolutely an MLS level player, but I think I don't think he benefits from the fact he's only had 6 starts this year. I think he's a guy that goes on runs and looks really good when he goes on those runs, and as a confidence player. And I think it's hard to get that when you've only made 6 starts. But with all that said, this is a guy that was a U.S. national team player at one point of his career, albeit 9 years ago. He's absolutely an MLS level player, and he just happens to be on a team that has 2 strikers that are better than him. So he's not getting a lot of time, not getting a lot of minutes at striker. And then he's on a team that has a winger in Tajon Buchanan that's a better winger than him. I don't think anyone would argue that. So where's his minutes going to come from? And maybe there's been times where I think he's played over Arnold Tristan because he's been disappointment. But he's a great depth piece that is paid the right salary for his contributions, and I think he's a good piece for the Revolution to have. And I understand that there's a lot of people that I think because of some of his misses in the past that have looked pretty bad that he has had. I don't think so much this year as in past years. People have certain opinions about him, but I think that's a very harsh comment to make. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't think it's ideal for him to only have 6 starts and be getting the limited minutes he gets this year, because I do think he's a guy that confidence plays a big role.
I think he's a guy that young players and new players to the league could look up to and learn a lot from. He's got to be such a great locker room person to have around. He's always got a smile on his face. I don't think I've ever seen Teal, aside from just being serious, not have a smile on his face. Yeah. He's just such a great person to be around, and always so positive.
Yeah, no, I think he's absolutely a good locker room presence and a good veteran to have around the team as well, and somebody that knows MLS and has seen success in MLS. So yeah, I don't know. The stuff that gets thrown around about Teal sometimes is a little ridiculous, because we always have to have at least one question that's not about soccer. PH Swimmer on Twitter wants to know, are hot dogs sandwiches?
Okay, so I hate this question.
Me too.
And I hate it for more reasons than one. One, I hate it because it's just a stupid question. But 2, I hate it because it actually makes me think. It's between 2 pieces of bread, especially if you're using a weak hot dog roll that splits at the bottom and it becomes 2 pieces, and you have protein in the middle. That's a sandwich, but it's not a sandwich. So it's in some sort of paradox catch-22 world. Maybe you can call it a sandwich, but I'm going to stick with hot dogs are just flipping hot dogs, and who the hell cares? Just eat it and stop asking this question.
I'm with you. And there's been some like really funny, if you watch the Little League World Series or some of the Twitter stuff about it, that was one of the questions they asked the kids to answer, and they had some of the same reactions as you. Those are actually pretty funny. If you haven't seen them, there was one where they tried to ask them to identify a floppy disk. So if you want to feel old,
okay, I did see
look at that disk one. Yeah, well, the same type of thing. I'm with you. If you put me on the spot, I would say a hot dog is not a sandwich, and my reasoning would be that I think it's technically only one piece of bread, but it's
squeezed too hard.
A hot dog's a hot dog.
I don't know.
Yeah, why do you have to classify everything into a sandwich or not?
Trade.
Last topic, you talked about it briefly. Tajon Buchanan to Club Brugge. $7 million transfer fee, I think, reported with a 10% sell-on clause. I think it was reported 10%. How accurate that is, I don't know. This seems like a pretty good deal to me. Revolution get a fee now. I think we talked in the past what we thought he should go for, and I think we said $7 million. So I'm guessing you're okay with this. And the sell-on fee is great because if his value skyrockets and they sell him, the Revolution get 10% of that. So I think that's a great thing. I don't think he's going to stay in Belgium very long. I think he's going to prove himself there and then go to a bigger team. I think this is a great move. People are excited about Champions League. They're in the Champions League. They got drawn into a absolutely awful group with who is it? Paris Saint-Germain's in it, right? Is it Paris Saint-Germain,
PSG, Man City, and I forget
Leipzig,
the other
right?
team.
Red Bull.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, all teams that are going to destroy them, they're going to be eliminated before Tajon gets there. So don't get too excited about them being in the Champions League. They're not. By the time Tajon plays for them, they're not going to be in the Champions League. So don't get too excited about that. But Chris, I think this is a good move. I think it's good for all parties. What do you think?
Yeah, I love the move. I think Bruges is definitely a good spot for him. My only concern with Bruges is the fact that 2 days after they announced Tajon Buchanan, Club Brugge goes and announces Kamal Sawa. I apologize, I'm not getting that name correct. I almost guaranteed. And he looks to be a right midfielder, right winger. And I'm like, why are you going to bring in two right midfield players 2 days apart from each other that seem to be at the same kind of stage of their career, at the same sort of skill levels, at least according to FIFA, because FIFA ratings are correct. But Kamal Sawa is a 65 rated player on FIFA, while Tajon Buchanan is a very underrated 64. So that kind of was a bit striking to me to see that sort of signing being made by Bruges after bringing in Tajon Buchanan. However, just focusing on Tajon, I think this is a fantastic move for him. Bruges is a fantastic launch pad and gateway into European football. And if some miracle happens and Bruges gets to advance into the knockout stages of the Champions League, Tajon Buchanan is going to be there for that. That will start in February.
That'd be more than a miracle.
More than a miracle. All we can hope is that PSG and Man City just knock each other down, and Bruges can sneak in the back door. It's not going to happen, but
I think the miracle would be them somehow getting third in the group and making Europa League, because even that is pretty unrealistic.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
But that would be great if they made it to Europa League knockout rounds and Tajon played in that. That'd be great. But I think in your best, wildest dreams, that's all you can really hope for, because I think they're even a distance behind Red Bull Leipzig as well, which is a really
exactly. Yeah, Jesse March's Red Bull Leipzig is the fourth team in Group A, which is just an unreal group to see. I think the only thing that's in Bruges' favor is the fact that Ronaldo signed with Man United instead of Man City. I'm sure a lot of people are upset or happy one way or the other with that decision, but we're not going to talk about Ronaldo today. At least I don't think we are. But yeah, at the business side of this deal for Tajon going to Bruges, I just wanted to add on, I think was fantastic. I've been saying 6 to 8 million is the mark to hit. 7 million, of course, is right in the middle of that. The sell-on clause is nothing that I was even thinking that they were going to try to get, but it makes sense. 10% is huge. I think that's a big sell-on clause. If you could do the math, 10% is pretty easy to calculate. That's going to be a lot of money if he can go for somewhere 40 million or something like that into a big club if he's making waves with Bruges. That's a big ask, but we've all seen Tajon's rise so far, and if he keeps going, I have no idea what the limit is for him. It's pretty high ceiling.
The only thing I will add to that is you mentioned Kamal Sowa being the other guy that they signed. I think it's always interesting to kind of look at what they're paying for players, and they paid 9 million euros for Soa, which is like 10.5 million US dollars. So if you're looking at that as to what they're thinking when it comes to playing time, maybe that's not a great sign for Tajon, but we'll see what happens. I mean, nothing's guaranteed. You look at Belgium and you expect that, he'll get plenty of playing time, but nothing's guaranteed in Europe. So,
and we also don't know what how Bruges plans on using Tajon because
True.
The Canadian team uses Tajon as a wingback that really gets up the field a lot. I think he's more attacking focused, but they've played him in that wingback position as well, and the Revolution have also used him there too. So Club Bruges, I don't know how they plan on deploying either Soa or Buchanan. Maybe one of them is going to be moving to the left. Time will tell. I'm excited to see what January brings and to see how Tajon acclimates to his new team. And congratulations to Tajon. That's a fantastic move for him.
Yeah, and there's like an obsession in Europe with turning players like Tajon or Alphonso Davies or into wing backs. Yes. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's where he ended up. So that'd be another interesting thing to watch. And I think he's certainly capable of playing that role. We've seen it enough. So that'll be fascinating. I think that's all we had, Kris. Did you have any last things you wanted to talk about or any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, this pod went a little bit long. I think we are both ready to forget this game happened and move on to the next one. Hopefully the next time that we have a podcast, which I think is going to be September 3rd, 4th, 5th, something like that. Hopefully we'll have some better stuff to talk about.
I mean, even if we don't from the Revs, we'll have some national team qualifiers, so we can always spin it that way if we have to.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a lot to look forward to there because I think we already know we didn't mention it, but Matt Turner was called up to the national team officially. Tajon Buchanan is officially called up for the Canadian national team, and Adam Buxa is officially called up. I think we already knew this by the time of the last podcast, but has officially been called up to the Polish national team. So 3 players that are going to be out for the next week and a half or so. It's going to be fun to get to watch them on the national stage, and hopefully they can make an impact for their teams.
But I guess the good news for the Revs, but not for him, is I think Tristison was not called up, right? Is that's official? So at least the Revs will need him.
Right. I didn't see him on the Iceland roster at least.
Yeah. So at least that's a positive for the Revs, not for him.
Yes.
And on that note, where can people follow you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me over on Twitter is the best spot to get in touch. Find me on my personal account at Kris Valukis, or you can just talk soccer with me over at Revs Revolt.
And you can follow me at Sean L. Donahue. Make sure you follow Revolution Recap on Twitter, also on Instagram, also on Facebook. And if you haven't yet, rate and review wherever you're listening. I think we're up to 70 reviews on iTunes, so thank you to everybody that has rated and reviewed us there. I think we still don't have any ratings on Audible. I don't know if anybody listens to podcasts on Audible, but if you do that, we'd appreciate your review. That's one area that we're lacking in. But again, thanks to everybody for listening. We'll be back at some point during Labor Day weekend. Make sure you follow us on social media, and we'll let you know exactly when that is. Lots to look forward to next weekend.